Glasses are on because class is in session. I've been reflecting a bit recently on my personal reading taste and my novel that I'm writing, expected 2055. I'm gonna try my absolute hardest for that to not become true, but they say to write the book that you want to read. Prompted by the Book Leo's video on reading critically, I made myself a little mind map to really define my favorite parts of the books that I read and my personal taste. I actually had a lot of fun just thinking about what I love reading about in books, and it helps me come to some realizations that I think will be helpful when choosing my TBR from now on, and also in writing my own book. So in this video, I wanted to show you guys how you can figure out your own personal taste. Before we get started though, I'm not making this video with the purpose of encouraging you to find one specific type of book and only ever reading that. You can really only find your personal reading taste by reading a lot and reading diversely. So yes, it's good to know what your personal taste is, but don't let that restrict you from exploring outside of that box. Okay, let's get into it. What we're going to be doing in this video is trying to build a concept for your perfect book. Not a story concept, this is not a writing video, although you could also apply this to figuring out the kind of novel that you want to write, which is partially why I did this little exercise, but rather certain aspects of a story that if they were to come together and it was a book to exist and you were to read it, it would be your perfect book, if that makes sense. So first we're just going to go over a couple prompts for you to kind of reflect on books that you have already read, and then we're going to make a little mind map for those of you that are visual learners like myself to help visualize. Bring this exercise to life, I guess. Step 1, think about your least favorite books, or parts of books that you really didn't like. Starting out in a seemingly counterproductive place here, but stay with me. Taking the time to really figure out what parts of books you really didn't like is actually super helpful in narrowing down potential books that you know you're going to like or dislike. For example, recently I have been trying to get into more sci-fi, so I read EXO by Fonda, which is a sci-fi dystopian. I enjoyed it, it was okay, but I had a realization that I had already, like I knew this about myself, but I just kind of pushed it to the back of my mind, probably because of one particular series. But that realization is that dystopian as a genre is just not for me. The only dystopian book that I've ever loved is The Hunger Games. So I think because that's kind of the only dystopian that I've read in recent times, I sort of forgot that it's not a favorite genre of mine. And to be perfectly transparent, I haven't read a lot of dystopians, but I'm pretty secure in knowing that it's just not for me. One, because in the past when I have read dystopian books, they have treated my anxiety pretty badly. Super fun, love that. Generally I read to get away from my anxiety, so yeah. 2, the overall vibe of the dystopian genre is very doom and gloom. Groundbreaking take, I know. Who would have ever thought that the dystopian genre would be a little bit moody? Not me. But that said, I prefer my books to be a little bit more fun and lighthearted. I like a dark undertone, but generally most of my favorite books are pretty upbeat. I just like there to be a bit more fun, humor, lightheartedness throughout them. The other realization I had while reading EXO is that when it comes to sci-fi, I am more interested in the space opera sci-fis. I want to feel like I'm living in the Guardians of the Galaxy world. Like I want there to be so many different worlds, so many alien races, so many like weird space futuristic technology stuff. Like I want to be deep in space, okay? The book EXO is set on Earth, and the sci-fi aspect of it is fairly tame. There are aliens and there's like a few bit of like futuristic technology, but other than that, it's not overly sci-fi-y. So in terms of genre, when I'm thinking of the concept of my perfect book, I know that the genre is not going to be dystopian, and it's also not going to be sci-fi, not because I don't like it, but just because at this stage I haven't read enough sci-fi for it to be my favorite. Plus I already know what my favorite genre is, but in case you don't, this is just for you to like have a think about if there were any books that belong in certain genres that you really didn't like. Another common denominator in some of my least favorite books is that there is a love triangle. Cliche, I know, everybody hates love triangles, whatever. But especially when the love triangle is like a main focus of the book or when it overshadows the plot. If it's like supposed to be a subplot and then it ends up taking over the story, nothing makes me madder. I'm not gonna get into it, but it frustrates me to no end. Obviously there are exceptions when love triangles are done well, but I just haven't read any. And stupid love triangles are like way up there on my list of bookish pet peeves, so I know when I'm looking at books to read, if there is a love triangle mentioned in the synopsis, I should probably stay away from it unless I really, really want to read the book. Because some of my least favorite books, Summer I Turned Pretty, I did not enjoy the books whatsoever. I despised that love triangle. And the Remnant Chronicles as well, I had to DNF. I also DNF'd The Summer I Turned Pretty, the last book. That might be controversial, but anyway. I also DNF'd the second book in the Remnant Chronicles because of the love triangle. So I know that love triangles are just not for me. Speaking of stupid, another thing that I can't stand in books is dumb characters. I am a very logical thinker when it comes to like emotions. And if the characters that I'm reading are not mature and can't communicate and repeatedly make stupid decisions, I can't do it. Especially if they are told to us as being like really smart or really mature or whatever, and they're just not, and they don't change. That's the other thing. I can handle it if they start out like that and then over the course of the story they grow up and mature and change and whatever. But if they just don't stop being stupid, then I can't deal. That being said though, with well-written complex characters, there are times where they can't communicate and they have good reason not to. So again, it's all relative to the specific book, the specific author, how it's written, all of that stuff, you know? And that's something that's a little bit harder to know until you actually start reading a book. But bringing it back to genre, I also know that my perfect book is not going to be romance because I find, one, there's a lot of love triangles in romance books. Two, I tend to read romance books for fun, light-hearted, easy breaks in between heavier books. And that's not to say romance books can't have depth, because some of them absolutely do, but a lot of them do fall into that like very surface level category, which again, I don't love. And I find romance plotlines always get repetitive for me pretty quickly if I'm reading a lot of them at one time. So it's not something that I read constantly. It's an every now and then treat for me. So I know romance is off the table for me when I'm picking out my perfect book. Now that we've wheedled out the things that we don't like, let's move on to step 2. Think about your favorite books. If you don't already know what your favorite books are, take some time to think about the books that you've rated 5 stars, the books that you had the most fun reading, the books that you were like completely in awe of, the writing or the story. Now try to think about what exactly drew you to those books. What kept you reading them? Do all of them or most of them belong to a particular genre? We're really focusing on genre in this video. Are there any similar storylines that appear in multiple of them? Are there certain character archetypes that show up a couple times? For me, again, back to genre. All of my favorite books are fantasy. Whether they're high fantasy or urban fantasy, they all have some element of fantasy to them. So I know that my perfect book is absolutely going to be a fantasy book. I particularly love when fantasies take place in a secondary world though, so I would rate high fantasy above urban fantasy or magical realism. For example, I adore the world that Jessica Townsend created with the Nevermore series or the Trials of Morrigan Crow, or Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere, even though I've barely scratched the surface with this. Funnily enough, now that I'm thinking about it, none of my top 3 favorites are high fantasy. They are all urban fantasy. Regardless, my perfect book would be a high fantasy in a secondary world. Now, I personally don't put a lot of weight in the age demographic of the books that I read. Some of my favorite books are middle grade, some of my favorite books are YA, some of them are adult. It truly doesn't matter to me, but perhaps it does for you, so that's probably something to think about. Whether you really don't like middle grade, you really don't like adult, you really don't like YA, have a think about your favorite books and what demographic they fit into. Now, you probably noticed, I think I keep saying favorite series instead of favorite books because all of my top 5 favorite books are part of series. I love being able to sink my teeth into a good, like 5-book long series. Most of my favorites are 4 or 5 books long. At minimum, they're a trilogy. Something that I have always known about myself and something that will always be one of the top reasons why I become obsessed with a book or a series is a good romance. I feel like I actually kind of suppressed this truth about myself for quite a while because I thought it was like kind of pathetic and shallow for that to be my favorite part of a book, but it's not. I love love. And watching Leonie's video where she also said that romance is one of her main reasons for wanting to read a book, I finally admitted to myself that I am in fact a lover girl. This is not news whatsoever. I'm a sook. All of my favorite books have at least one main romance plotline. It's gotten really dark in here. There is a caveat to me enjoying romance in books though. I personally prefer when the romance is a subplot and a slow burn. For me to be like hey son. For me to be absolutely consumed by a romance in a story, I need crumbs. As we have all collectively been begging for recently, I require yearning. I experienced Percy all those years ago and I said, this is it. This is peak. I want to forever be reading a 5-book series where I have to suffer through getting maybe 3 romantic scenes per book until the last book where they finally get together. That is true bliss. Step 3, mind map. So now that we've done some reflecting on what we do and don't like in books, we have hopefully narrowed down the genre, certain tropes that we like, certain storylines that we really are drawn to, and also themes is a good one to think about. We can make a visual representation of all the things that will add up to make our perfect book. As you can see, I used my iPad to make my mind map. However, if you wanted to roleplay as a writer from the 1700s, there's this really ancient thing called pencil and paper, which you could also use, but it's kind of hard to get a hold of. As I mentioned before, I know that my perfect book is going to be fantasy, so I haven't put that on here because fantasy is always my #1 girl, so I don't even need to. And we also know that one of my favorite things in books is a romance storyline, but more specifically a romance subplot, slow burn subplot. So let's put romance and also fantasy with a romance subplot, slow burn, and then getting a little bit more specific into my favorite tropes. We've got friends to lovers and enemies to lovers. Friends to lovers, if we're going off the Percy archetype, it's more childhood friends to lovers, but either way, I don't mind. And enemies to lovers is only if it's done well. I've said this before, I'll say it again. I need my enemies to absolutely despise one another, okay? Not just knife to the throat, oh my god, they must hate each other. Like, no. Violence. Pure hatred, okay? I want them plotting. Maybe I shouldn't say this. This sounds really... No, we all understand, okay? You guys understand. I want them plotting each other's deaths, alright? This is like my #1 priority. First up, okay? Fantasy and a good romance. Not a romantasy because again, I like the romance to be a subplot. Like, way in the background, okay? The next most important thing for me is complex characters. I maybe mean this in a little bit more of an obscure way compared to complex characters that have like true motivations and contradictory beliefs and like in-depth backstories. I also mean complex characters, yes, in that sense, but also in the sense that they feel real. For example, with the Raven Boys, the Raven Cycle, I have never read another series or book or whatever that has achieved what Maggie achieved in this book in making me feel like this is a real group of friends and I'm just like observing their interactions. When I say complex characters, what I'm looking for is like those tiny little minute details or interactions between them and other characters that make them feel real, you know? Ever since I read this, I've been trying to, again, replicate the high of this feeling when I first read about Blue and her Raven boys, and I fear Maggie has set me up for disaster and I will never find anything quite as good, but we keep looking. Now, related to that, when it comes to my sense of complex characters, is found family, because one, I obviously love found family, as most of us do, but I specifically feel like when the friendships and relationships between the main character or main characters and the rest of the cast of characters, when that is done well, that is what really brings to life a story and its characters and what makes it feel real. So, not only do I just love found family as a trope in a book or movie or whatever, I also really appreciate when it contributes to the complex character side of things. Bringing it back to the Raven boys, a specific thing that I love about certain found families is codependent friendships. And not in like a toxic way, but just in a way that, like, in the Raven boys, Blue has a conversation with her cousin, and her cousin is like, not everyone has to be like completely obsessed and in love with their friends. Like, you can just have a normal friendship. And Blue sits there and she's kind of like, I don't want that. Like, ew. Now that I've had this, I don't want anything else. And I just love when the found family is like kind of codependent, and it's like you could never be a part of that club because they just connect on a different level. They understand each other on a different level. That hits so good. Now, if we're talking about blood family in books, something that I absolutely love reading about is complex family dynamics. I love reading about a good, messy family. And not in the sense of like there's a lot of drama, well, also the drama, but the dynamics between each character, whether it's like sisters or a parent and a child or like cousins or whatever it is. I love for it to be like such a deeply layered relationship, and it's like they could never encapsulate their relationship with this family member in like a simple, straightforward way. Oh, it's so good. And when I say like blood family, it doesn't necessarily have to be blood family, but because something that I love in the Cruel Prince series is Jude, Taryn, and Maddox's relationship to one another. Because if you haven't read the series, Maddox is not Jude and Taryn's blood father. He actually killed their mother and their father, their real father, but he has raised them since they were 7, I think. And they do have this like twisted, strange love for him and horrible hatred for him because of what he did to their mother and father, and also what he did to them as they were growing up. But it's such a layered relationship, and they do love him. They do love him and treat him as their real father, and he treats them as his real daughters. I'm obsessed. Another specific trope that I love within complex family dynamics is tragic siblings. I don't know why I zoomed in so far for that, but it's really important to me. I love a good, messy sibling dynamic. Think A Dark Shade of Magic, Kel and Rye. I think that is like one of the books that really made me realize that I love this. Also Jude and Taryn. If you haven't read A Dark Shade of Magic, Kel is an adopted son of the king and queen. Rye is the heir to the throne. He's their blood son. And Kel is kind of used as like his protector. And he always struggles with this feeling of truly belonging in this family and truly being a family member rather than an asset to the family. And Rye always struggles with trying to make Kel feel like he is part of the family. And they like have this struggle throughout the whole series. And it's tragic and I love it. And I also loved Kel and Connor from the Swordcatcher series, which is essentially the same dynamic. Kel is Connor's body double, so going out to public appearances, Connor can't actually be there in case he gets assassinated. So Kel is, he's the sacrifice so that the prince doesn't get killed. And I love it because they are like brothers. Every single time I read about it, I adore it. And it really frustrates me when there could be a really complex sibling dynamic and it's just not executed well. Okay, moving on to more world building related aspects of a story that I love. Magic. Of course, a fantasy book has to have magic. And specifically with magic, I absolutely love fun and whimsical magic. I am tired. I am tired of the doom and gloom. When we are writing fantasy, why are we not taking advantage of the freedom that fantasy allows us, okay? We are writing books with magic in them and we are not using that to our advantage whatsoever. Ugh. Some books that I really love for their use of fun, whimsical magic is Nevermore. Again, the world is so fun in this. The magic is like, it's just fun. It's not a defined magic system, but there is so many aspects of this world that like is influenced by magic or is magical. And it's just, she just has fun with it and I adore that. Also the Caraval and Once Upon a Heart series by Stephanie Garber, they both take place in the same world. This is like pure whimsical magic. There's just little things that like the tiny little baby dragons that literally have no consequence to the story, but are just there. Why not? I missed a step. Oh my god, I'll get back to it. But whimsical magic, the fact that Scarlet's dress changes color depending on her moods, it's fun. Now, having spoken about that, I missed a crucial aspect of my perfect book, and that is dragons. I can't believe I've done this. This is a betrayal to myself and everything that I stand for. I love dragons. I've spoken about this many times, but I'm obsessed with How to Train Dragon, have been ever since I was like 8 years old. Any single book that has even this tiniest sliver of dragon content in it, I am there. It is like a perfect book to me. That's a joke, but any book with dragons will always have such a special place in my heart, and I will probably rank it above others that don't have dragons, even if I didn't like the book that much. What can I say? Dragons are just like, dragons are fantasy. You know, what would we be doing without dragons in fantasy? Honestly. Taking it back to world building / plot. I love a good political intrigue plot. Brandon Sanderson, Mistborn series, the Cruel Prince series or Folk of the Air series, the Ember Quartet, all of them have strong political plots throughout them. Like, people always misrepresent the Folk of the Air series as a romance fantasy, which it's just not. It's a political fantasy. It is all about Jude and her struggle to power, but I just love reading a good juicy political intrigue plot. I don't know what it is, I don't really know why, but I just really enjoy reading it. And every single book that has a political intrigue plot, the fact that it has political intrigue is like one of the main reasons that I like it. Even if I didn't like the book itself, I will say like, oh, it had political intrigue, so I enjoy it. Now, another thing about world building I love is unique world building. I'm kind of getting sick of, and this is like my own fault for not really branching out and finding things outside of this category, but I'm kind of sick of the standard Western European backdrop in a lot of fantasies and the standard king and queen royal court setup. Even though I love both of those things, I have recently really been appreciating when I pick up a book and it's something that I feel like I haven't read before and something that I feel like is new and a unique concept to this specific book. It doesn't even have to be like the world as a whole, but certain aspects of the book that are unique. For example, I read Untethered Sky recently by Fonda, again, my girl. She's getting a lot of shout outs in this video. And I felt like that was such a unique and special book. It's a short novella. It's the concept of rocks, because rocks are a mythical creature, but like I have never seen them in any media other than Untethered Sky. 1, focus on unique mythical creature. 2, the process of training them. Even though we have like a lot of magical boarding school books, I haven't read a lot of books where they train the magical creatures. So I really enjoyed that. I just have really been noticing and appreciating recently when I read books that are unique and have a little bit something different to them. Now we move on to the last aspect, which is themes. And themes are not something that I've ever thought about when I'm reading books. It just doesn't cross my mind. Sometimes I'm reading a book and I'll think, oh, this has a really strong theme of whatever in it, or like the underlying message that they're trying to tell me is this. Sunrise on the Reaping, a very obvious one, is not falling for propaganda and the government quite literally being able to make the masses believe whatever they want you to see. But when I was making this mind map and thinking about aspects of books, something that I struggle with in my novel is that I don't really know what kind of themes that I want it to hold. I don't know what message I want to send with it. So I did a little research on my favorite books and what themes that they have in them. And a lot of them were overlapping, which is like totally crazy, right? But those themes were identity, found family, power, loyalty, trust, and love. Identity was something that I never would have picked out. It just never crossed my mind. When I was thinking about themes, I was like, obviously found family and like belonging, because most of the books that I read have found family in them in one way or another. But come to find out, a lot of the books that I consider my favorites also have a strong theme of identity and like discovering yourself, which could also be because of the fact that they're mostly young adult or middle grade, and that tends to be a strong theme in young adult and middle grade books. They're coming of age stories. Another one that I was surprised to see was power, because I'm not necessarily a ambitious or power hungry person, but when I thought about it, I was like, oh, I love reading political intrigue. Obviously power is involved in that, and like Jude especially, a lot of her story is to do with building up her own power, and not in a magical powers kind of way, in the sense of political power. So that makes sense. Loyalty, trust, love, they're all, you know, I feel like they all tie into the found family concept and also romance. I would agree that this would fit into my perfect book, because overall, a lot of these are on surface level light kind of themes, like they're not dark themes, but all of them can be turned into that. They can all have aspects or storylines that could turn much darker than initially suspected. And I like that. So there you have it. That is my mind map for my perfect book. This is just a silly little exercise that I did on my own time and decided to share with you. And I found it really fun and also pretty insightful. I do think that I'm going to like check back on this mind map every now and then, whether I'm looking for books that I want to add to my TBR or whether I'm kind of lost with my own book. I'm gonna refer back to this and be like, what do I need to be looking for? If you followed along and you made your own mind map, or you just had to think about what kind of books that you do and don't like and certain aspects that you love, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you had a good time. And I hope it was helpful for you in narrowing down your personal taste. But that is all for today's video. Again, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching. But yeah, I really appreciate you being here. My art Instagram, my Storygraph, and my Goodreads are all linked in the description down below, as well as my Ko-fi if you would like to support me. That would be very much appreciated. And I will see you all next time. Bye!